Clear out your office by 5, Natalie, and don't make this embarrassing for yourself. The words came from across the polished mahogany table, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who has never faced consequences. Derek Whitmore sat at the head of the conference room, his new corner office visible through the glass behind him. Beside him, her hand resting on his forearm like a brand of ownership, sat Cassidy Vance, my best friend since business school. Now, apparently, the new chief strategy officer of Bellcrest Holdings. And, based on the matching Cartier bands I noticed on their fingers, my replacement in every conceivable way. The room held 12 board members. Not one of them met my eyes. The inheritance you were counting on? Derek continued, shuffling papers with theatrical disinterest. Your mother's estate went into probate 3 months ago. The lawyers confirmed there's nothing there. Just debt. So whatever leverage you thought you had? Gone. Cassidy leaned forward, tilting her head with practiced sympathy. We tried to protect you from this, Nat. But the board feels your position as Vice President of Client Relations has become redundant. My name is Natalie Carver. I am 43 years old, and for the past 16 years, I have been the invisible architecture holding Bellcrest Holdings together. I built the relationships Derek takes credit for. I drafted the contracts Cassidy now waves around as evidence of her brilliance. I spent weekends with our legacy clients while my husband played golf with investors and told them stories about his vision. The thing about being the person who actually does the work is that you learn exactly where all the load-bearing walls are, and which ones, if removed, will bring the entire building down. I looked at the divorce papers already placed in front of my seat, pre-signed, the severance agreement beneath them, the NDA requiring my silence about internal company matters. Derek thought he was ending me. He did not realize he had just handed me the blueprints to end him. The boardroom air felt thick with expensive cologne and cheap betrayal. 12 people I had worked alongside for years suddenly found their phones fascinating, their coffee cups riveting, anything to avoid witnessing the execution they had sanctioned. I understood. Cowardice is easier when you do not have to watch. Cassidy was still talking. Something about transition support and professional references. Her voice had that particular tone people use when they want to sound compassionate but cannot quite hide their satisfaction. I had heard her use it before, at dinner parties, when she described colleagues she had outmaneuvered. I never imagined I would be on the receiving end. Derek drummed his fingers on the table, impatient. He wanted this over. He wanted me gone before I could cause a scene, before I could say something that might make the board members uncomfortable. He had always underestimated my self-control. That was his first mistake of many. The terms are generous, he said, considering the circumstances. Considering what circumstances exactly? I asked. My voice came out steady, almost pleasant. Derek's jaw tightened. He had expected tears, maybe pleading, perhaps the dramatic outburst that would justify everything he had told the board about my emotional instability. Instead, he got a question he could not answer without admitting what everyone in that room already knew. Cassidy jumped in. The restructuring, the new strategic direction. It requires fresh perspective. Fresh perspective, I repeated. From someone who has been with the company for 8 months. Experience is not the only qualification for leadership, Cassidy said smoothly. I let that hang in the air, let the board members sit with it. Most of them had been recruited by me. Most of them owed their seats to relationships I had built with major investors. But loyalty, I had learned, is a commodity that depreciates quickly when self-interest enters the equation. I picked up the divorce papers, scanned the first page, then the second. Derek had been thorough, or rather, whatever lawyer he had hired had been thorough. Every asset divided, every account specified. The house apparently was his. The car his. My mother's estate, which he believed was worthless, graciously left to me. You will need to sign before you leave the building, Derek said. Company policy. I was not aware we had a policy requiring same-day signatures on legal documents, I said. I helped draft the employee handbook. That policy does not exist. Derek's smile flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough for me to see the uncertainty beneath the performance. I stood, smoothed my blazer. The one my mother had given me when I was promoted to VP. The one Cassidy had once called dated at a company retreat. I picked up the papers and tucked them under my arm. I will need these in writing, I said. From legal. Not from you. I walked out of that boardroom with my head held high and my chest so tight I could barely breathe. 16 years. 16 years of early mornings and late nights. 16 years of solving problems no one else wanted to touch. 16 years of watching my husband take credit for my work while I smiled and called it teamwork. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I caught my reflection in the polished steel. I looked calm, composed, professional. The woman staring back at me gave no indication that her entire life had just been dismantled in a 30-minute meeting. I had joined Bellcrest when it was a struggling regional firm with 12 employees and a lease they could barely afford. The company was hemorrhaging clients after a disastrous investment recommendation. 3 months from bankruptcy, according to the accountant who later became my first ally. I was 27, freshly married, and naive enough to believe that hard work would be recognized and rewarded. That first year, I rebuilt the client relationships one phone call at a time. I apologized for mistakes I had not made. I offered solutions I had developed on my own time. I flew to meet skeptical investors and convinced them to give us another chance. By the end of that year, client retention was up 40%. Derek presented the results to the board. He did not mention my name. The pattern established itself early. I would fix the problem. Derek would claim the victory. I told myself it did not matter. We were a team. His success was our success. The money came home to the same address either way. But the Harrington family trust was different. That relationship was mine alone, built on a foundation Derek knew nothing about. My mother, Eleanor Carver, was not the retired schoolteacher he always dismissively described at dinner parties. She was the original legal architect of the Harrington Trust's investment structure. For 40 years, she had advised Margaret Harrington on everything from estate planning to philanthropy. When my mother introduced me to Margaret at a holiday party 15 years ago, I did not realize I was being handed a legacy. The Harrington Trust now provided 34% of Bellcrest's annual revenue. I was the only person Margaret spoke to directly, the only one who knew how she liked her reports formatted, the only one who remembered her late husband's birthday and sent flowers every year. Derek thought that relationship belonged to the company. He was wrong. That relationship belonged to my mother, and now it belonged to me. I thought about my marriage as I drove home through streets I had traveled 1,000 times, how Derek's ambition had slowly eclipsed my presence, how the dinners together had become dinners with clients, how the weekends had filled with golf games and investor retreats that spouses were not invited to attend. Cassidy had entered our social circle 5 years ago, introduced by a mutual friend as someone brilliant and driven. I had liked her immediately. I had trusted her completely. The affair must have started around the time my mother fell ill. Those months of hospice visits and sleepless nights, of holding my mother's hand while she struggled to breathe. I was too exhausted to notice the texts, too distracted by grief to question the work dinners that ran until midnight, too focused on loss to see the new loss taking shape behind my back. I did not cry. I was too tired for tears. The weight of 16 years settled onto my shoulders as I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, my mother's home, now mine. If you have ever stayed late while someone else took credit, if you have ever watched the wrong person get promoted because of who they knew instead of what they did, then you already know why I did not react in that room. You learn to keep your face still. You learn to save your real response for when it matters. If that sounds familiar, maybe stick around. I have a feeling this story is not going to end the way they expected. Inside the house, everything still smelled faintly of my mother's lavender sachets. I had not changed anything since her funeral, could not bring myself to remove her reading glasses from the side table or pack away her collection of ceramic birds. The grief was still too fresh, too raw to process alongside the new wound Derek had just inflicted. But grief, I was learning, could be clarifying. It stripped away the comfortable lies you tell yourself. It revealed what mattered and what never really had. I walked to my mother's study and opened the personal safe she had shown me 3 days before she died. Inside was a sealed envelope with the Harrington family crest embossed in gold. I had not opened it yet. I had been waiting for a moment that felt right. Or perhaps I had been afraid of what I might find. Now, sitting in my mother's chair with my future in ruins, I broke the seal. The letter was dated 1 week before my mother's death. The handwriting was Margaret Harrington's own, slightly shaky but unmistakable. "My dearest Natalie," it began, "if you are reading this, Eleanor is gone and you are likely wondering what comes next." The next morning, I sat across from Paul Chesney in his cramped HR office. Paul was a nervous man on his best days, and this was clearly not his best day. His desk was cluttered with the paper trail of my 16-year career. Personnel files, performance reviews, commendation letters from clients who would never know they were about to be handed off to Cassidy Vance. "The termination package is standard," Paul said, sliding a folder across the desk. 3 months severance, forfeiture of unvested stock options, and the NDA, of course. Of course. The NDA. Because nothing says we value your contributions like a legal document threatening to sue you if you tell anyone what actually happens here. I picked up the folder, opened it slowly, read every line while Paul shifted in his seat. His discomfort was palpable. He kept glancing at his phone, at the door, anywhere but at me. I wondered what Derek had told him. Probably something about my emotional state, probably a warning to call security if I became hysterical. Instead, I became something far more dangerous. I became precise. "Who drafted this agreement?" I asked. Paul blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The termination package. Who drafted it?" "Well," he cleared his throat, "Derek's office sent it over this morning. Our standard template, modified for your situation." "When was the board vote?" "The board vote? On my termination. When did the board formally vote to terminate my employment?" Paul's face went through an interesting series of expressions: confusion, concern, the dawning realization that he did not actually know the answer to a question he should definitely know the answer to. "I assume it was discussed at the regular board meeting last week," he said carefully. "You assume." Derek indicated that the board had approved the restructuring. I nodded slowly, let the silence stretch, watched Paul begin to sweat. "Was I given the required 72 hours notice?" I asked. "Per my original employment contract?" Paul fumbled through the papers on his desk. I knew he would not find what he was looking for because it was not there. The contract I had helped draft in 2015 contained specific provisions about executive termination. Provisions that Derek, in his haste to remove me, had apparently not bothered to review. "I'm not certain that clause applies to your current role," Paul said weakly. "It applies to any executive-level employee, which I have been for 11 years. I pulled out my phone and opened the document I had saved there. Section 14.3. Board notification of any executive termination must be provided to all major stakeholders within 48 hours, including external stakeholders with contractual observation rights." Paul's face went pale. Actually pale, like someone had drained the blood from his cheeks in real time. "What does that mean?" he asked. I smiled politely. It was not a friendly smile. "It means you should find out. I'll wait." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and dialed what I assumed was the legal department. I listened to his half of a conversation that grew increasingly strained. Terms like stakeholder notification and contractual obligations and, "I don't know," she just asked, floated through the air like warning flares. When he hung up, his hands were trembling slightly. "I've been advised to postpone the finalization of your departure paperwork," he said, "until legal can review some procedural questions." "Of course," I said. I stood and gathered my things. "Take all the time you need." I left without signing anything. As I walked through the lobby toward the elevator, I felt eyes on me. I looked up toward the executive floor, toward the glass wall of Derek's corner office. Cassidy was standing at the window, watching me leave. For the first time since that boardroom meeting, she did not look smug. She looked uncertain, perhaps even worried. Good. I took that expression home with me like a small, precious gift. Alone in my mother's house, I finally opened the letter from Margaret Harrington all the way. I had read the first paragraph the night before, then stopped. Some things require courage to face, and I had needed the night to gather mine. Now, in the quiet of the morning, I read every word. "My dearest Natalie," the letter began. "If you are reading this, Eleanor is gone, and you are likely wondering what comes next. I want you to understand something your mother was too modest to explain. Our relationship was never about Bellcrest Holdings. It was about Eleanor, and by extension, it was about you. The letter was 3 pages long. Margaret's handwriting grew shakier toward the end, but her meaning remained crystal clear. She wrote about 40 years of friendship with my mother, about trust that transcended business, about the investment mandate that governed the Harrington Trust's relationship with any financial institution. There is a key person clause in our agreement with Bellcrest, Margaret wrote. It allows us to withdraw all funds if the designated relationship manager is terminated without my written consent. That designated relationship manager is you, Natalie. It has been you since the day your mother introduced us. I set the letter down, picked it up again. Read that paragraph 3 more times. Derek had fired me without consulting the client who provided 34% of the company's revenue. He had done it without reviewing the contract that governed that relationship. He had done it because he was arrogant and impatient and fundamentally incapable of imagining that the woman he had dismissed might hold any real power. But the letter was not finished. There is something else you should know, Margaret continued. Your mother was not just my advisor, she was my protector. 15 years ago, when Bellcrest was struggling, Eleanor convinced me to invest. But she also insisted on protecting you. She arranged for a 7% equity stake in the company to be held in your name through a family LLC. Derek has no visibility into this arrangement. It was Eleanor's insurance policy for you. I did the math quickly. 7% from my mother's gift. Just over 4% from the shares Derek had given me during our marriage, shares he now thought he was reclaiming through the divorce. Combined, I held just over 11% of Bellcrest Holdings. 11% was enough to demand a board seat. The letter ended with a single line that made my eyes sting for the first time since the boardroom. When you are ready, call me. Your mother always said you would know what to do when the moment came. My mother had been protecting me all along. Through every dinner party where Derek claimed credit for my work. Through every promotion he received while I stayed in the background. Through every late night I spent solving problems while he collected accolades. She had been quietly building a fortress around me, waiting for the day I would need it. I put the letter down and picked up my phone. But I did not call Margaret. Not yet. There was someone else I needed to speak with first. Judith Thorne had been Bellcrest's external legal counsel for almost as long as I had been with the company. 12 years ago, when she was a young associate at a mid-tier firm, I had written her a recommendation letter that helped her land a partnership position. She had never forgotten. She answered on the second ring. Natalie, she said. Her voice was careful, measured. I heard about what happened. I am so sorry. I need to see you, I said. Not at your office, somewhere private. There was a pause. Then, I know a cafe downtown. Quiet. Discreet. Perfect. I met Judith at a small cafe 3 blocks from the courthouse. She was already seated when I arrived, a cup of black coffee cooling in front of her. Judith was 52 years old, razor sharp, and currently wearing an expression that told me she had already done some preliminary research on my situation. Show me, she said, before I had even sat down. I handed her Margaret's letter. She read it twice, her face shifting from professional concern to something colder and more focused. When she looked up, her eyes held the gleam of someone who had just spotted a very interesting legal problem. They didn't review the key person clause, she said. It was not a question. Apparently not. And this equity stake? Through a family LLC. Derek has no knowledge of it? My mother set it up before we were married. Everything runs through her estate planning attorney. Derek's name never appeared on any document. Judith leaned back in her chair. Walk me through the termination. Everything that happened in that boardroom. I did. Every word, every gesture, every uncomfortable silence from the board members who had watched me be executed without protest. Judith took notes on a legal pad, her handwriting precise and rapid. When I finished, she set down her pen. They violated at least 4 internal protocols, she said. The 48-hour stakeholder notification was never sent. That's confirmed. The Harrington key person clause was clearly never reviewed, or someone would have flagged it. And Derek's restructuring, putting Cassidy in a C-suite role? She shook her head. That appointment skipped required board subcommittee approval. 3 members were supposedly traveling, so he pushed it through an executive session. Which isn't allowed under the bylaws. Which isn't allowed under the bylaws you helped draft. Judith smiled grimly. There's more. I've been hearing things. Rumors about Derek shopping the company to acquisition partners. My stomach tightened. What kind of partners? Private equity. A firm called Ardent Capital. They specialize in financial services roll-ups. She paused. The deal has apparently been in negotiation for months. Derek is positioning Bellcrest for sale. I thought about the divorce papers. The urgency of my termination. The way Derek had wanted everything signed and sealed before I could ask questions. He's trying to cash out, I said slowly. Before anyone notices that the Harrington relationship depends on me. That's my read. If the Harringtons withdraw before the sale closes, Bellcrest's valuation collapses. He knows that. He's racing the clock. I sat with that for a moment. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. Derek had not just left me for Cassidy. He had not just fired me to clear the way for his new relationship. He was trying to sell the company out from under everyone, board included, while using my termination to clean up what he saw as a loose end. This isn't just personal, I said. This is structural fraud in progress. Potentially. Judith's voice was careful. We would need documentation to prove intent, but the pattern is there. She looked at me across the table. Her expression was steady, assessing. I could almost see her calculating the odds, weighing the risks, deciding how far she was willing to go. I have a question for you, she said finally, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Ask. Do you want to stop the sale, or do you want to control it? I had thought about revenge, abstractly, in the hours since the boardroom, the satisfying fantasy of Derek's face when everything collapsed around him. But revenge, I was realizing, was too small a goal. Revenge was reactive. It let them set the terms. I wanted something bigger. Something that would reshape the entire board they thought they controlled. I want them to beg me to stop it, I said. Judith nodded slowly. A small smile crossed her face. Then we have work to do. 3 days passed. I watched from the outside as Derek and Cassidy paraded through investor meetings, announced a new strategic direction, and gave interviews about Bellcrest's evolved leadership. The trade publications ran flattering profiles. Cassidy was described as a rising star in strategic consulting. Derek was praised for his bold vision and willingness to make difficult decisions. No one mentioned my name. 16 years of work, erased in a press release. I spent those 3 days gathering documentation, reviewing every email I had saved, making copies of every contract I had helped negotiate, building a file that would eventually become the foundation of everything that followed. On the 4th day, I called Margaret Harrington. She answered immediately, as if she had been waiting by the phone. Natalie, she said. Her voice was warm but tired, grief-worn like mine. I was hoping you would call. I'm sorry it took so long. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. And do you understand now? I think so. I took a breath. Margaret, they fired me, without consulting you, without reviewing the key person clause, without any of the notification requirements in your contract. I know. There was no surprise in her voice. My lawyers flagged the missing notification within hours. I have been waiting to see what you would do. That stopped me. You knew? Eleanor told me this day might come. She said you would handle it with grace. She also said you would need time to realize you didn't need their approval to be valuable. Margaret paused. Was she right? I thought about the 16 years, the missed promotions, the stolen credit, the slow erosion of my confidence as Derek's shadow grew, and mine shrank. She was right, I said quietly. Good. Now tell me what you need. I explained everything, the secret sale negotiations, the violated protocols, Derek's plan to cash out before the Harrington relationship came under scrutiny. Margaret listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. What are you asking me to do? She said finally. I'm not asking you to withdraw the funds. Not yet. That's a nuclear option, and I want to save it. I had thought about this carefully. What I need is more surgical. A formal letter of concern from the Harrington Trust to Bellcrest's board. requesting a meeting to review relationship continuity under new leadership. Addressed to whom? Every board member. Individually. With your signature. And Derek? Not copied. There was a sound on the other end that might have been a laugh. Eleanor was right about you. Does that mean you'll do it? It means I'll do more than that. Margaret's voice hardened slightly. The Harringtons are prepared to back you as an independent board member, Natalie. If you can force the vote, we will nominate you ourselves. I closed my eyes, felt the weight of my mother's ring on my finger. The ring I never took off. The ring that now felt like armor. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet, we're just getting started. Margaret's letter arrived at Belcrest the following morning. It was addressed to every board member individually. Derek was not copied. The Harrington letter landed like a silent grenade. I heard about the fallout through Judith and through a nervous text from Paul Chesney, who suddenly wanted to clarify a few details about my severance. The board is asking questions, Judith reported over the phone. Two of the veterans, the ones who remember Eleanor's role in the 2012 restructuring, have requested a private briefing on the key person clause. Derek is scrambling. I could picture it perfectly. Derek in his corner office, his face flushed with irritation, trying to reassure everyone that the Harrington relationship was stronger than ever, that my departure was mutual and amicable, that nothing had fundamentally changed. But the letter specifically asked to meet with me. By name. That detail, I knew, would keep him up at night. Cassidy, meanwhile, attempted damage control. She called me directly that afternoon, her voice dripping with false warmth. Nat, hi, I've been thinking we should clear the air. Get lunch, just the two of us, like old times. Like old times. As if old times included sleeping with my husband and taking my job. Sure, I said pleasantly. When and where? She named an upscale restaurant downtown. The kind of place where executives went to be seen. I understood immediately. She wanted witnesses. She wanted to be able to tell people she had reached out, tried to mend fences, been the bigger person. I agreed without hesitation. I wanted to see what she would say. I arrived at the restaurant calm, composed, and carrying a leather folio. Cassidy was already seated, a glass of sparkling water in front of her. She stood to hug me, which I endured without reciprocating. You look good, she said as we sat. Rested. I've had time to think. That's healthy, she smiled. The sympathetic tilt of her head was exactly the same as it had been in the boardroom. Nat, I want you to know, what happened between Derek and me, it was never meant to hurt you. How was it meant exactly? Her smile flickered. It was a natural evolution. These things happen in close working environments. Derek was already unhappy. You know that. You two had grown apart, had we? Your obsession with work, Nat. All those late nights. The weekends with clients. She leaned forward with practiced intimacy. You pushed him away. We both saw it happening. I let her talk. Watched her construct a narrative in which she was the innocent bystander, the reluctant participant in someone else's crumbling marriage. It was masterful, really. If I had not lived the reality, I might almost have believed her. What do you want, Cassidy? She paused, recalibrated. I want you to be happy, Nat. I want you to move on with your life. Find peace. Another pause. And I think I can help with that. How? She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, slid it across the table. A gesture of goodwill, she said. From me personally. Enough to give you a fresh start somewhere new. Away from all this drama. I looked at the envelope. Did not touch it. Is this a formal offer? I asked. From the company? No. She hesitated. Personal. From me. Then it's not relevant to anything I'm doing. I stood, gathered my folio, looked down at the woman who had been my closest friend for almost a decade. Thank you for lunch, I said. But I think we're done here. I left her sitting there with her envelope and her carefully constructed story. As I walked to my car, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly, something colder and more useful. She had offered me personal money, not company money. That told me everything I needed to know about how confident they actually were in their position. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. An email from Belcrest's board chair, Franklin Mercer. Subject line, confidential. Harrington matter. I smiled and opened the message. Franklin Mercer was 68 years old school in his suits and his handshakes and his belief that business could still be conducted between gentlemen over good scotch. He had been on Bellcrest's board for 20 years, one of the few remaining members who remembered what the company had looked like before Derek's rise. We met at his private club, a dark paneled room full of leather chairs and the lingering smell of cigars that had not been smoked there in decades. Franklin looked uncomfortable, which for a man of his composure was saying something. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "I know this is irregular. Most things have been irregular lately." He acknowledged that with a grim nod. "The Harrington letter has raised concerns. Significant concerns. I need to understand the full picture. What would you like to know? Is the relationship salvageable? Without you?" I appreciated his directness. Franklin was not a man who wasted time on pleasantries when substance was required. "No," I said. "It isn't." "You're certain?" "Margaret Harrington has made clear that her family's continued investment depends on my involvement. Not Derek's charm, not Cassidy's strategy decks. The relationship was built on 40 years of trust between Margaret and my mother. That trust transferred to me. It does not transfer to whoever happens to hold a C-suite title." Franklin exhaled slowly. "Derek assured us the client relationships were institutional, that they would survive any personnel changes. Derek assured you what he needed you to believe." There was a long pause. Franklin stared into his scotch as if it might contain answers. "There's something else you should know," he said finally. "Derek has been negotiating with a private equity firm, Ardent Capital. The deal is further along than most of the board realizes." "I know." His head came up. "You know, I've been doing my homework." "Then you know the terms favored Derek's personal payout." "Significantly. The rest of us." He shook his head. "I didn't fully understand the implications until the Harrington letter forced me to reread the term sheet. And now you understand." "Now I understand that we may have been played." He looked at me with something like respect. "What do you want, Natalie? What's your endgame here?" I had thought about this moment. How much to reveal, how much to hold back. Franklin was a potential ally, but trust, I had learned, needed to be earned. "I have an 11% equity stake in Bellcrest," I said quietly, "held through a family LLC that Derek has no visibility into." Franklin's expression shifted. Surprise, then calculation, then something like relief. "You have standing," he said. "I have standing. You can force a shareholder vote, if necessary." He sat back in his chair. For the first time since I had arrived, some of the tension left his shoulders. "Would you consider rejoining the board?" he asked. "Not as an employee, as a director, representing the Harrington interest." I let the question hang in the air. Studied his face for signs of manipulation, of hidden agendas. Found only exhaustion and genuine concern. "I'll consider it," I said. "But first, I want to see the unredacted term sheet from Ardent Capital." Franklin nodded slowly. "I can arrange that." The Ardent Capital term sheet arrived 3 days later, obtained through a discovery process triggered by my formal notice of shareholder concern. Judith Thorne spread the documents across her conference table, and we read them together in silence. The numbers told a story more damning than any accusation I could have made. Derek had negotiated a personal payout of $14 million, structured as a transition bonus that would trigger upon close regardless of post-acquisition performance. Cassidy would receive $3 million as part of a leadership retention package. Meanwhile, other shareholders, including employees with vested stock options, faced a 40% dilution. The Harrington Trust's preferred shares would be converted to common at an unfavorable ratio. The deal was legal, technically, but it was structured to benefit Derek at everyone else's expense. "He knew," I said quietly. "He knew the Harringtons might leave once I was gone. He structured everything to extract maximum cash before the collapse became visible." Judith nodded. "The affair with Cassidy wasn't just personal. It was strategic. He needed someone inside who would help push the sale through without scrutiny." I sat with that realization for a moment. Let it settle into my bones. My husband had not just betrayed me for another woman. He had used that betrayal as cover for financial fraud. Every late night Cassidy had spent at our house, every dinner party where she had laughed at my jokes and complimented my cooking, had been part of a long-term extraction plan. The anger came then. Clean and cold and absolutely controlled. Not the messy rage of wounded pride. Something sharper, more useful. I want 2 documents, I said. A formal demand for a special shareholder meeting, and a personal letter to Margaret Harrington outlining the Ardent deal's impact on the trust's position. Judith was already reaching for her legal pad. Consider it done. My demand for a special shareholder meeting, backed by my 11% stake and the Harrington Trust's 18%, forced the board to schedule a vote on the Ardent acquisition. Derek could not block it. The bylaws were clear. 25% of voting shares could compel a meeting within 30 days. The next 2 weeks became a quiet war of position. Derek launched a charm offensive. He called shareholders individually, promising accelerated dividends and painting me as a disgruntled former employee with a personal vendetta. I heard about these conversations through Judith's network of contacts, the web of lawyers and accountants who saw everything and reported to everyone. But the term sheet was circulating now. Employees with stock options, people I had mentored and supported for years, started asking questions. 3 of them contacted me directly, voices careful and uncertain. "Is it true?" they asked. "About the dilution? About Derek's bonus?" I did not campaign. I did not make speeches or send mass emails or engage in the kind of corporate politicking that Derek excelled at. I simply shared documentation when asked. Let the numbers speak for themselves. Trusted that people would recognize the truth when they saw it. Cassidy, meanwhile, made a critical error. In a board presentation designed to demonstrate her command of key client relationships, she claimed she had personally managed key transitional conversations with Margaret Harrington's team. Margaret's lawyers sent a formal correction letter the next day. It was addressed to the full board, with copies to every major shareholder. It stated, in unambiguous legal language, that no representative of Bellcrest other than Natalie Carver had conducted authorized discussions with the Harrington Trust in the past 5 years. The lie had been public. The correction was more public. I watched the house of lies begin to collapse under its own weight. Derek's confidence wavered. Board members who had seemed firmly in his camp started asking for additional documentation. The Ardent Capital representatives, sensing trouble, began requesting assurances that the deal could still close. The night before the shareholder meeting, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I had not seen in weeks. Derek's voice was tight when I answered. "We should talk," he said, "before this gets out of hand." I met Derek at our former home. His home now, per the separation agreement he had drafted unilaterally. The house where we had built a life together. Where I had cooked dinners and hosted holiday parties and slowly disappeared into the background of his ambition. He was alone when I arrived. Cassidy was notably absent. Perhaps she knew better than to be present for this conversation. Or perhaps Derek had finally understood that her presence would not help his case. He stood in the foyer, looking older than I remembered, tired in a way that expensive suits could not hide. The confident man who had dismissed me in that boardroom was nowhere to be seen. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'm not here to reconcile." "I know." He gestured toward the living room. "Can we at least sit?" I followed him to the couch where we had once watched movies together on Sunday evenings. Sat in the chair across from him, maintaining distance. "I made mistakes," he began. "We lost our way, Natalie, both of us. But that doesn't mean we can't find it again." I said nothing. Let him talk. The divorce. It was premature. I was confused. Cassidy, he waved a hand vaguely. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that we can still fix this. Walk away from the shareholder meeting. Drop the objections. I'll restructure the Ardent deal to protect your interests. We can figure out the rest later." "No." He blinked. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no. I'm not interested in reconciliation, and I'm not dropping anything." His expression hardened slightly. "I'm offering you a way out, Natalie. A generous way out. Triple your severance." The NDA dropped entirely. "You can walk away clean." "I don't want to walk away." "Then what do you want?" I looked at him. This man I had loved for 15 years. This man who had systematically erased my contributions while building his career on my work. This man who still, even now, could not conceive that I might be operating from a position of strength. I want you to understand something, I said calmly. I'm not here to negotiate. Then why are you here? I'm here to tell you that I know about the ardent side letter. The color drained from his face, slowly, visibly, like watching a tide recede. I don't know what you're talking about. The clawback provision, Derek. The one that says if the Harrington relationship terminates within 18 months of close, Ardent can recover 60% of your transition bonus. I let that sink in. You knew the Harringtons might leave. You knew it when you structured that bonus. You were planning to extract the maximum cash and disappear before anyone realized the company was about to collapse. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's a private agreement, he said finally. How did you? It doesn't matter how I got it. What matters is that I have it. And tomorrow, so will the board. Natalie. His voice cracked slightly. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The investors, the quarterly targets, the... You didn't just betray me, I said quietly. You tried to defraud the board. That's not a divorce issue, Derek. That's a fiduciary issue. I stood, gathered my coat. Wait, he said. We can still... No, we can't. I left without another word. At the door, I glanced back through the window. He was sitting motionless at the kitchen table, phone in hand, making no calls. The man who had controlled every room he entered had finally run out of moves. The special shareholder meeting convened in Bellcrest's largest conference room. Every seat was filled. Board members, employees with stock options, representatives from major investors. The tension was thick enough to taste. Derek and Cassidy sat at the front table, flanked by two representatives from Ardent Capital who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Their body language told me everything I needed to know about the conversations that must have happened overnight. Ardent was already distancing themselves from the deal. Franklin Mercer called the meeting to order. His voice was steady, but I could see the strain around his eyes. This was not how he had imagined spending his final years on the board. Before we proceed to the vote on the proposed acquisition, Franklin announced, the board has received new information requiring disclosure. The room went quiet. Franklin read from a prepared statement, the side letter, the clawback provision, the fact that Derek had failed to disclose material information about deal terms that could significantly impact shareholder value. I watched Derek's face as Franklin spoke, watched the careful mask crack and crumble, watched Cassidy's hand twitch toward his arm, then pull back. Watched the Ardent representatives lean toward their legal counsel with urgent whispers. At this time, Franklin continued, the chair recognizes Natalie Carver to speak as a shareholder representative. I stood, smoothed my blazer, touched the ring on my finger, my mother's ring, the one Cassidy had once mocked at a company dinner as old-fashioned. The room was silent as I walked to the podium. I did not attack Derek personally. I did not mention the affair, the divorce, the years of stolen credit. Those were personal grievances, and this was a business meeting. I would not give him the satisfaction of watching me make it about emotion. Instead, I presented facts. The key person clause and what it meant for the Harrington relationship. The trust's formal position, as communicated through their legal representatives. The side letter's implications for the deal structure. The 40% dilution facing employees under current terms. I spoke for 12 minutes. I did not raise my voice. I did not gesture dramatically. I simply laid out the reality that Derek had been hiding from everyone in this room. When I finished, I made a motion to table the Ardent acquisition pending an independent review of the CEO's disclosures. Franklin called for a vote. The count came back 62% in favor of tabling. Derek's deal was dead. The room erupted in whispers. The Ardent representatives were already gathering their papers, preparing to leave. Cassidy's face had gone pale, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. I remained at the podium, watching Derek. He would not meet my eyes, could not look at the woman he had dismissed as redundant, as emotional, as finished. Franklin spoke again, his voice cutting through the noise. The chair recognizes the representative of the Harrington Family Trust. A woman I did not recognize stood. Her voice was clear and formal. The Harrington Trust will be providing a formal recommendation for board restructuring, she announced. As part of that recommendation, the trust nominates Natalie Carver for the vacant director seat. The whispers stopped. Every head turned toward me. I said nothing. Let the moment speak for itself. Derek finally looked up, and in his eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. He understood, finally, that I had never been the supporting character in his story. I had always been building my own. The aftermath unfolded over the next 2 weeks with the steady inevitability of falling dominoes. Derek was placed on administrative leave, pending a formal fiduciary review. His corner office, the one visible through the glass wall of the conference room where he had tried to end my career, sat empty. His nameplate removed, his personal effects packed into boxes that no one offered to help him carry. Cassidy fared no better. Her CSO appointment, rushed through without proper board approval, was quietly unwound. The compensation committee reviewed her employment terms and found material irregularities. She was informed that her position was being restructured, which was corporate speak for eliminated. I watched from the outside. I had not yet accepted the board nomination, wanted to see how deep the rot went before deciding whether to rebuild or walk away. Judith Thorne kept me informed. Ardent Capital had withdrawn entirely, citing material misrepresentations in the deal process. Their legal team was considering claims against Derek personally. The divorce proceedings, meanwhile, had taken a sharp turn. My lawyers had filed for full asset discovery, including Derek's hidden accounts and the ardent bonus he had never disclosed as marital property. The most satisfying moment came unexpectedly. I received a forwarded email from Paul Chesney, the HR director who had once tried to expedite my departure. Apparently, conscience, or perhaps self-preservation, had gotten the better of him. The email was a chain between Cassidy and Derek, discussing how to manage Natalie's emotional instability after the termination. "She's always been fragile," Cassidy had written. "This will probably break her, but it's better than letting her hang around and cause problems." Derek's response: "Just make sure she signs the NDA before she falls apart. I don't want her talking to clients." I saved the email. Not for court, not for leverage, just for myself. To remember what they had thought of me. To remember why I had stopped needing their approval. Franklin Mercer called that afternoon. "The board wants to discuss something beyond the director seat," he said. "We're considering you for interim CEO while we search for permanent leadership." I thanked him, said I would think about it. And then I drove to the cemetery where my mother was buried. The cemetery was quiet in the late afternoon light. I sat on the bench near my mother's grave and let myself feel the full weight of the past month. 16 years of invisible work, an 11-year marriage built on unequal partnership, a best friend who had never really been a friend at all, and now, an offer that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. Interim CEO. The position Derek had schemed and betrayed and defrauded to reach, handed to me not through political maneuvering, but through the simple revelation of truth. I thought about what it would mean to take it, the long hours, the board meetings, the constant pressure to perform, the building that had never seen me clearly, even when I was holding it together. I thought about Margaret Harrington's offer, too, to work directly with the trust as a strategic advisor, outside any single company, building relationships the way my mother had done. I thought about Derek, who would likely avoid prison but would never recover his reputation, about Cassidy, who was already updating her LinkedIn to remove Bellcrest entirely, about the employees who had sent me thank you notes after the shareholder meeting, people I had mentored who finally understood what I had been doing all those years. I realized, sitting on that bench, that I did not want to be CEO. Not because I could not do it. I could. I had been doing it for years, just without the title or the compensation. But I had spent too long proving myself to people who did not deserve the effort. Too long seeking approval from institutions that took my work for granted. Too long making myself smaller so that others could feel larger. I wanted something else now. Something that belonged entirely to me. I drafted my response to the board that evening. I accepted the director seat. I declined the CEO role. And I made one additional request: the creation of an employee equity committee to review any future acquisition terms affecting staff shareholders. It was time to build something new. I joined the board as an independent director the following month. My first motion was the equity committee. It passed unanimously. Derek was formally terminated for cause. His severance was void. His ardent bonus, never paid, became irrelevant. The divorce settlement, finalized 3 months later, awarded me the house, full recovery of my personal assets, and 65% of marital property. This included Derek's vested Bellcrest shares, now worth significantly less after the Ardent collapse. There was a certain poetry in that. He had tried to steal everything I had built. In the end, I walked away with pieces of what he thought was his. Cassidy disappeared from the industry. Rumor said she was consulting for a startup in another city. I did not follow up, did not care enough to track her path. Some people leave your life, and the space they occupied simply closes behind them. The new permanent CEO was an external hire named Renata Walsh. I helped recruit her. She was sharp, ethical, and understood immediately what I had brought to the company. In her first all-hands meeting, she publicly acknowledged the invisible work that had kept Bellcrest running through years of mismanagement. Some of you know Natalie Carver as a board member, Renata said. I want you to know her as the reason this company still exists. The relationships she built, the clients she maintained, the problems she solved when no one was watching, that work mattered. And going forward, that kind of work will be recognized and rewarded. I sat in the back of that meeting and let myself feel something I had not felt in years. Scene. My work with the Harrington Trust began quietly. I traveled occasionally, meeting with Margaret and her family, advising on relationships rather than transactions, building things that would last beyond quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. On the anniversary of my mother's death, I visited her grave and found a handwritten note waiting on the bench. Margaret Harrington's stationery. Her shaky, elegant script. Eleanor would be proud, it read. So am I. If you stayed until the end, thank you. Not for the watch time, though I appreciate that too, but for understanding why this story mattered. It is not really about revenge. It is about what happens when you finally stop waiting for the people who overlooked you to see your value. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is build something new. If that is where you are, I hope you keep going. And if these stories help, consider subscribing. I will be here. I stand on the balcony of my new apartment now, smaller than the house but entirely mine. The city hums below. I think about Derek briefly, without anger. He will spend years explaining what went wrong. I do not need to. I have my mother's ring on my finger, my own name on the lease, and a future no one else designed. The company that forgot me remembers now, but I no longer need it to.